Welcome to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional Facebook page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The intro and outro music for these episodes are by Otter Creek.
Hello, everybody. This is Natasha Helfer. This is the Natasha Helfer Podcast. And what we love to do here is attack shame through stories, through education, through all kinds of ways that we can just try to get a little bit more shame out of our lives. And I'm super excited for today's topic because I think it is one that is unfortunately doused with lots of shame. Anytime we're talking about sexual trauma, sexual abuse, I will say that this is a show on sexual trauma, in particular with partners of sexual trauma. So if that's something you don't want like kiddos to hear or whatever, just know that, I don't think we're going to go into any lurid details or anything, but, just a shout out in case there's somebody who needs either some time to take care of yourself. Sometimes, it can bring up triggers in your own life. And sometimes you just may have listening ears around you. So this is definitely going to be some adult content. Anyway, with me today, I have the fabulous Megan Negendank. Megan and I go back a ways because she did her sex therapy certification. I was, I think, one of your supervisors anyway, or main supervisor. I love supervising you. She's also a licensed marriage and family therapist. She has completed her certification in a sex therapist. She's the founder of Love, Heal, Grow, a psychotherapy center in Northern California, where she specializes in trauma-informed, relationship-focused psychotherapy for survivors of trauma and their partners. She just recently wrote a book called Loving Someone Who Has Sexual Trauma. I have the book right here. It says a compassionate guide to supporting your partner and improving your relationship. She's been featured as a relationship expert on PBS, NPR, and in the Sacramento magazine. So congratulations for all that. I think writing a book is a huge endeavor. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
And I'm just so excited for this topic, Megan, because I think already I feel like I struggle having a lot of resources just to offer my sexual trauma survivors, because there's a lot of books out there, but there's very few books that I'm comfortable just handing the entire thing over to clients. And I think there's hardly anything in regards to helping those who are partnered with somebody who has experienced trauma in their past or in their current, as maybe a traumatic experience has happened during their actual relationship. So this is really, really exciting. So anyway, before I keep on blabbing, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Tell us what you're all about and kind of what maybe got you interested in writing this book.
Yeah, thank you so much, Natasha, and thank you for having me on. Well, your intro was pretty thorough. So I'm a therapist in Northern California, and when I was working on my hours, so when I was still in grad school, the site I was assigned to, where I was learning how to do therapy for the first time, I was supporting sexual trauma survivors. And like so many of us, I have my own sexual trauma story. And I just have such a heart for survivors, and it's become a passion of mine to support them. And as I leaned more into couples therapy over the years, I love supporting couples. I realized the same thing you were saying, which is that there aren't resources for the partner, and the partner wants support. Like, how do I support my loved one? How do I cope with my own stuff that's coming up? Because sometimes, depending on where folks are in their healing as survivors, it can be triggering to the partner, and the partner can start personalizing some of the stuff going on. So I had in my mind, like, maybe someday I'll do some kind of resource for folks. And then an opportunity presented itself to write a book, and I did some research. There isn't a book out there. And so I spent about a year and a half writing this book based on the work I've done, the work that others have done in supporting survivors. There's some attachment stuff in there as well, which I think, I love attachment perspective in my work. So yeah, so the book's out there in the world, I hope helping people, but it's been a huge endeavor. And I think that, it's definitely something that can help partners in their own healing, as well as supporting the survivor and building a really secure relationship.
Yes. Yeah, that's fabulous. And now that I think about it, yeah, I don't think that there's any book out there. I've seen some articles, like if you look up Psychology Today or something, sometimes there's some articles of what
Mm-hmm.
you do to support a loved one. But I think another complaint that I hear a lot of, both from victims and survivors of sexual abuse and their partners, is that they'll say something like, well, I've done and I've gone and I've done and I've done a lot of trauma work, but now I guess I need to work on my sex life. And I always have this like quizzical look on my face, right? Like, so in doing the work, quote unquote, nobody ever helped you with your sex life? Like,
Right.
nobody ever
Yeah.
talked about your sex life or what's
Right.
happened. So I guess I don't know what it means to a lot of people to quote unquote do the work. I don't know if it's about disclosing what happened or getting more comfortable with what happened or understanding trauma symptoms or things. But I'm like, I mean, as a survivor too, myself, I'm like, this comes up in the bedroom all the time for me, right? It comes up,
Right.
I can have
Right.
a trigger, I can have a flashback, I can have just a little sense of like something just feels off or my pleasure gets interrupted. I call these like trauma interrupters. They're just so much fun.
Yeah.
And they usually like to show up like 2 seconds before I'm having an orgasm, right? So it's like, oh,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
great. This is lovely.
Yeah.
So yeah, so having, I think a lot of and that's one of the things I really enjoyed about the book was that you just give some very frank advice and examples and strategies for people, good questions to be asking, etc. So anyway, I think that's really lovely. But let's just kind of follow your book, kind of just table of contents. So I mean, you start off with just kind of understanding, right? Understanding the partner and the survivor experience. You also follow 5 different couples with different scenarios. So do you want to say a little bit about kind of how you set up the book and what you were hoping people would get out of having the different
Sure.
examples available?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So, when I was thinking how to make this book accessible and maybe even enjoyable in some aspect to read, like relatable for folks, I know that a lot of times when I'm working with couples, they can feel so isolated in their experience, and they want to know, because we're not, sitting around at the dinner table when we're having maybe like a group gathering talking about our sex life necessarily, talking about our traumas. They want to know, are other couples experiencing this? And we know as therapists, yes, so many are. And so I wanted to bring relatable stories into the book that folks might see themselves in it, or it might open their eyes to really how normal the experiences they are having. So I include 5 couples, and they're each going through a different, or the victim survivor is having a different type of trigger. Maybe they're at a different point in their healing. So maybe it's a very recent trauma like harassment or assault at work. Maybe it's something that happened in childhood that's just resurfacing. But a different point in their healing with a different trigger coming up, and then how that's impacting the relationship. So we see throughout the book the perspective of both the survivor and their partner, how it's affecting them. And then as I introduce different techniques, we see some of the couples apply those techniques to their relationships and the outcome of that.
I love it. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail because I just think that so many of these couples, I mean, I just felt like you just hit it spot on. And I loved that you included a lesbian couple and a gay couple, and I think a person with they, them pronouns. I mean, just gave it a really nice feel of all different kinds of couples. So the first couple is a heterosexual couple. You have them named as Thomas and Marina. They're going along, they're having life, they have a good sex life, they have a good marriage. I think it's a pregnancy that kind of starts getting things off the rails. So they have their first child. This has an impact on the wife, who is the sexual abuse survivor, and she basically becomes more protective, which we see this a lot times with, like you kind of go along with your life and then you have your kids and trauma stuff comes back, right? Trauma stuff that you've kind of been putting on a shelf. And so then she starts withdrawing from her husband, not that babies aren't already
Right.
like usually a sex interrupter.
Yeah, right.
But she
That's for everyone. Yeah.
But it's more than that for this couple, right? She really starts noticing like some old triggers. She starts withdrawing from him. He starts really struggling, like what's going on? We've never had these issues. We've always been very close. He likes to comfort her. He likes to offer her help. And she starts making comments like, well, this feels like it did when I was abused. And so you can imagine for the partner, for the husband in this particular scenario, how unfair and furious he feels this is. Like, here's somebody who, who harmed my wife, and now I'm having to pay the price for it, right? So I think it's a very common sentiment. Is that anything you want to say more about?
Yeah, well, yeah, that shows up with the couples I've worked with so frequently. Because it makes sense, right? Like I have both Thomas and Marina in this story, in their lives, have worked on creating a really safe environment in their relationship, in their home. I wrote a little bit about how Marina feels like this is the safest relationship she's ever been in. And so Thomas has that narrative, like, I'm the safe person. We have I'm able to give shelter and safety to my wife. And then to hear, this feels like what happened when I was abused. This feels like being now seen, maybe, or Thomas is hearing it as, I'm the bad guy. And it's so normal, I think, for partners of survivors to personalize when they hear these things. Like, what am I doing wrong? We've had a healthy sex life. We're able to talk about things openly. We've created safety. I don't think I've ever harmed you. And then folks can get defensive, or they can feel really bad about themselves. They can withdraw. They can become angry. And then how do we support them? Because the survivor's having their trauma trigger. So they can't really do the reassurance maybe that the partner needs to help get back to a better place.
Yep, that's exactly right. The second couple is a lesbian couple. You have them named as Gia and Samantha. And this is more of a situation where they're going along their lives. They're in a relationship. They're doing great. But I think it's Gia has like a work environment where she's noticing some sexual harassment from a boss. Little things are happening, right? Like the grooming, right? The grooming is happening little by little. She, and even though I think she complained one time and somebody's like, oh, that's how he is with everybody.
Right.
Don't worry about it. Just kind of this minimizing of a boss type person who's going to take advantage of their power. And a sexual harasser. And then he invites her to like a late night meeting or something, and she kind of questions it, but she's like, well, I don't want to be the one that makes a big deal about it, right? All the things that happen, right, that are so normal mentally. So she goes, and sure enough, she gets assaulted by her boss. And then does come home and tells her wife, and and they work through it, but just so much embarrassment, so much anger, so much not knowing what to do about their, her work situation, not knowing if she's going to report it or not, right? And then the wife, like, just angry and, coming to, just wanting to, go attack this person, right? Who just hurt her wife. And then what was really interesting that you said, it was just a one-liner, but that the wife was even angry at her wife, at the person who had been assaulted, because she was like, just not that she said it, I don't think, but just kind of like, how could you be so stupid to have gone and put yourself in this situation? And then of course the victim was thinking about that herself, right?
Yeah.
So the double shame, the double disappointment. Anyway, what do you want to say more about this situation? It just broke my heart, right? I mean, I see this all the time.
I really wanted to capture the dynamic of when the survivor or the victim can go into depression or really like shut down because of what you're saying, like the embarrassment, the shame. So many people had told her, oh no, this guy's fine. Like, he just does that. Go, he does night meetings sometimes. So she questioned herself, and she lost her ability to trust herself. And so when she shuts down, her partner kind of holds the anger about what happened and got really big, and then is, why aren't you joining me in this anger? Why aren't you joining me in this rage? Like, let's do something about this. And it's so protective, but also can do so much harm in the relationship and to the survivor. Mhm.
Right. When the survivor isn't ready to do the confronting, doesn't
Right.
want to report, those things are so tender, right? To
Yeah.
decide what you're going to do with that information. And so, whether you have a friend or a lover who's pushing you to do stuff that they think is the correct thing, that pushing can be what is very off-putting,
Yes.
and can cause that divide.
Mhm.
So hard. All right, you have a gay couple, calling Favor and Frank. And this is another one where they're kind of going along. They're partnered, they have a really good relationship. But one of them is starting to experience a lot of stress at work. A lot of things are going on. So just kind of more of a stressful time than normal,
Mhm.
which stress is a trigger, right, for things to come up for us that maybe haven't come up for us in a while.
Mhm.
And so they're going along, and I think it's Favor is the person who experienced a date rape, I believe that was. And
Mhm.
so Frank, I don't know, he knows that Favor's stressed out, so he went and tried to like initiate sex and have a nice time with his partner. And all of a sudden, like, I don't know, he touches him a certain way, and Favor gets kind of tense and quiet and withdraws. And of course,
Mhm.
his partner notices that. I think
Mhm.
he says maybe like, is everything okay? And Favor says, yeah, everything's fine. And
Mhm.
but he can tell it isn't. This is
Mhm.
a very common kind of
Yeah.
scenario as well, right? Where somebody notices body language shifting, but nobody really knows what to do about it. Nobody knows how to
Right.
talk about it.
Right.
There's embarrassment. There's,
Yeah.
I think because it had happened during a date rape, Favor was embarrassed to even tell his partner about that.
Yes. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
now there's this big silent divide. And he's like, I don't know what I did wrong. And I don't want to do that again. So now now Franco starts not initiating sex.
Right.
Right. This is so common too.
Right. And then there's just avoiding intimacy
Mhm,
and not really knowing how to talk about it. And
mhm.
as we know from having supported folks, that can go on for years sometimes, where
Yes.
like there's this awkwardness. How do we talk about it? We haven't found out how to talk about it. And then we're, instead of coming together, there's more and more disconnection over the years. Yeah.
Right. 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 And it's just because again, there's so much shame involved. There's so
Yeah.
much shame and embarrassment involved. And I think in particular, I mean, I think it's shameful for everybody, but I think we do know that in the research it shows that if you identify as male, the shame is even more so,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
of course it's only women who get victimized, right?
Right.
Like,
Right. Men can't be victims. Mhm.
yep,
Mhm.
exactly. All right, another interesting scenario that I thought was really cool that you put in is another heterosexual couple, Jennifer and Todd, and she doesn't really remember like that there's been a whole lot of sexual abuse in her past or whatever, but I don't know, she has kind of like a sense, right? And then the Me Too movement happens and she starts hearing all these stories and she starts like putting two and two together that even if there wasn't some major sexual abuse issue that happened in her past, there was lots of little things like sexual
Mhm.
harassment, unwanted sexual attention,
Mhm.
just kind of boys will be boys, hearing jokes in her home that were inappropriate about men
Mhm.
and women. And so she starts feeling fiery. I think a lot of us can relate to this. A
Mhm.
lot of us started feeling very fiery
Yeah.
with the Me Too movement, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, there's a voice. There's
Mhm.
like, there's people saying this needs to stop. And the husband is kind of like, he considers himself supportive and he considers himself even a feminist.
Mhm.
Like, I don't get what the big deal is. Like, it doesn't sound like anything really happened to you. Like what's real and what isn't
Yeah.
real,
Mhm.
what
Mhm.
constitutes abuse and what doesn't. And so
Mhm.
she has a fit with her
Yeah.
husband, right, that
Yeah.
he has his response.
Yeah.
So the feminist rage comes alive and well.
Yeah.
And they've got grown sons, right? So they're kind of like in older midlife. So yeah, what do you have to say about that presentation?
Well, I think living through the Me Too movement really inspired the story because I saw this happening, in my own marriage and with friends of mine in my parents and aunts and all the different relationships, different conversations happening. And the defensive of the husband in this story, I think We saw a lot of men like, not me. I'm not the bad guy though. I have in this couple, they have two girls, and so he thinks of himself as like, I raised girls, I'm protective of them. We're all equal here, but he really had to confront this minimizing that he had been doing and how he contributed to rape culture. And I think some of the most rewarding work, both in my personal life and as a therapist, was seeing a lot of men step up to this and start seeing how they were contributing. So I wanted to have that story in the book.
Yeah, I love it. And I think it gives a lot of, as you read through the book, for people who have a harder time understanding, like, quote unquote, what the big deal is, it kind of gives some really good examples of why this might be so painful and hurtful for so many people that you're currently living with, right? Whether it's your wife or even a family member, a sister or friends or whatever. Okay, and then the last couple that you mentioned is Julia and Nico. And what was interesting about this one, which I'm guessing you put in on purpose, is that Julia had been actually sexually abused by her aunt. So it was a female perpetrator, which we don't see as often. So I do think that the numbers are somewhere in the 80 to 90% is usually a male perpetrator, but that doesn't mean female perpetrators don't exist. And I think sometimes that's a sense of shame in of itself. And I know this is a female who was abused by female, but I think a lot of times boys are abused by females as well. And especially if it's a teacher or an old babysitter, they're kind of under this idea that, oh, well, I was supposed to enjoy it because don't all boys like any sexual attention.
Right. Very, very or maybe I did it. Maybe I actually like attracted them to me and created it.
Right. So really problematic messaging, I think, when there's a female perpetrator involved. So anyway, and this is more of a new relationship. They're getting to know each other. They're really connecting. And it just goes into her history that because of the triggers that she has dealt with, she usually just doesn't last very long in her relationships, right? Like, things start becoming sexual with her partners, and then she just kind of opts out or dissociates, or and then things just kind of go sour, and she doesn't really want that to happen in this because they're so connected. They're having such a good time. So I think that's really challenging too for people who are not necessarily partnered for long terms yet, but they're trying to get into relationships with folks, and they're noticing some of these sexual things come up for them as they're trying to connect.
Right. And they're like, do I tell this new partner about what's going on? How do I tell them? Is this going to scare them away? Are they going to see me different? Really, really confusing. And I liked including this one because it was the first time, I believe I write in the book that it's her first time feeling safe enough to open up with the person she's dating about it. And he's able to be supportive and trustworthy.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. And you get to follow these people along in the book. So I kind of loved all those stories. I'm hoping, and you even ask after each story, it's like, have you ever felt this way? Are these questions that you've ever had? I really like the questions you ask. And I resonated with all the stories, especially with so many people who've come through my office. The next thing that you do is you define what is sexual trauma. And I always try to do this as well in my groups. And it feels like, we have such ideas that like sexual trauma must be like, I don't know, something happening in a back alleyway with strangers and something scary. And that's not really the case at all. So most sexual trauma actually happens with known people not strangers. So it's usually their community or partners or family members, especially if you're young. Childhood abuse. So so I just want to go through these really fast. You say childhood sexual abuse and molestation, incest, which has to do specifically with a family member, emotional sexual abuse and sexual harassment. See, I love that you include this, because a lot of times, and especially when I run my groups, one of the things I say is, let's not do trauma competition. Right? Like, you all have a right to be here. Doesn't matter if somebody touched you or didn't touch you, or if you feel like it's big T or little t, like your system, if something unwanted happened to you that was sexual, I think you have every right to, prioritize your healing and not feel
Yeah.
like, oh, I've had several people say, well, I feel like I'm taking up a spot that somebody else
Yeah.
who could really use it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, ooh, that's not great. So emotional sexual abuse and sexual harassment, so shaming, controlling or manipulating, discriminating. I don't know that any of us hardly get away
Right.
without having been emotionally sexually abused.
Right.
And then the next one that you include, which was the first time I think I've seen it in a book, is religious or cultural sexual abuse. And what that means is not just like a clergy person actually abusing you, but like the actual ideas that a religion or culture can have that. Anyway, what do you want to say about both emotional and
That was so important to me to include that because I have worked with so many folks that in their adulthood, whether the motivation is leaving their religion or questioning their religion, or having a relationship with someone with a different cultural experience, leading them to kind of reflect on their own. But they're in this place of questioning whether their beliefs around sex are really theirs or were instilled by their culture or their religion. And I know this is a special interest of yours in your work, but the safety that they need to be able to question that and to find themselves and to grieve because their culture and religion is so deeply part of their identity and includes a lot of positive things usually also. So it was really important to me to include that.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I hope you don't mind. I'm just gonna read this little
Mhm.
paragraph of yours.
Mhm.
Um, and even what you just said, like, are the ideas ours or our cultures? I always tell people, I don't know that we're ever gonna know.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Like, I don't know that we can ever completely tear apart the fabric that we grew up in, right?
Right.
As far as gender roles, even concepts like monogamy here in the United States, like
Right.
things that we just take for granted.
Right.
Like, of course, this is what everybody does, right? But
Right.
does that mean that that's my idea, or is that just the ocean I'm currently swimming in,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So anyway, you say this can include rigid gender or sex roles in relationships, rules and requirements around sex and sexuality that all persons involved in the religion or culture are expected to follow in order to remain a part of the community. Rituals or practices that increase sexual shame or fear, forced sexual partnerships, forced changes or medical procedures to genitalia, and misinformation on sex and sexuality used to control or manipulate members of the community. So that's, yeah, I'm so glad you included that. You also included sexual assault, date acquaintance rape, marital rape, military sexual trauma, which I was really glad to see that because that has its own, I think, yeah, I've worked with not many military people, but a
Mhm.
lot over 30 years. And some of the cultural issues around military and who you can tell and
Mhm.
all the all
And
the
the way they deal
power.
with it outside of the way that we would as civilians, that
Mhm.
their own like legal system and way to deal with it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the power dynamics
Yeah.
and the emotions and who's
Mhm.
going to believe who.
Mhm.
And sometimes, careers could be over for reasons like that. And then
Yeah.
some people don't tell, all kinds of things. Again, I had heard the term before, but I haven't really seen it in here is corrective rape, which is a hate crime in which someone is raped because of their known or perceived sexual or gender orientation, and the perpetrator may be intending to turn a person heterosexual or force them to present as cisgender. So that's a very specific like
Mhm.
trying to impose power in a way that's just kind of pretty
Mhm.
horrific. Anyway, so I think it's really important to define sexual trauma to and especially if you're a partner, listening to whatever your person is telling you about their sexual trauma, of course, is to believe them and to try to understand and all that. Okay, so the next thing you do is you go into a lot of consent. What do you want to say about kind of general principles of consent? How can that be helpful, especially when we're dealing with um, having sex with somebody that has
Right.
had trauma history?
Right. Right. Well, if we think about relational trauma, sexual trauma, part of that is that there isn't consent, or if there was consent early on along the way, the consent stopped. We're not taught about consent in I think a very accessible way as we're growing up. I think it's starting to get a little bit better. Um, and in our parenting, I think we're getting better at from a really early age, teaching our kiddos about consent. But when we have a partner with sexual trauma, we're going to have sex with them, it helps their healing to have a relationship where they have permission to be themselves and to change their boundaries at any point. And so to have verbal consent, but also be attuned to our partner and noticing, like in a couple of the stories, the partner noticed, oh, you're kind of checking out what's going on. And then reestablishing consent if we're going to go forward creates so much safety, and then also helps with healing because the survivor can start feeling like my body's my own again, if that's not how it felt because of the trauma.
Yeah. And that's in particular really tricky if your partner is going through like a freeze response,
Yeah.
right? Because they may not be saying no, they may not be saying stop.
Right.
They may not, they just may be kind of going along with the motions, which
Yeah.
leaves a lot of guesswork, right,
Yeah.
for the partner.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I really loved that you had in the book, I forget the exact verbiage, but it was just like, this would be for the partner to ask, is do you ever have a hard time stopping or saying no while we're having sex? Has that ever happened?
Mm-hmm.
And is that something that I should be aware of? So again, just
Mm-hmm.
very direct questions,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
we're not really taught to ask. And
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, that's a simple yet very direct, very effective question.
Right.
And, follow-up questions like, okay, well, what could we do? What could we do
Yeah.
if we're in that situation again? Or
Yeah.
because the partner can't be a mind reader completely either.
Right. Right.
At the same time, sometimes they notice,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they don't, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
a partner will just be, I'll have partners who are devastated going, I didn't really realize this was happening, that my
Right.
partner was dissociating.
Right. 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 Yeah. Because that freeze response or that fawn response coming up, that was helpful potentially in their trauma to survive their trauma comes up, and so the partner doesn't know it's going on. And so having these conversations and being able to have them when we're not activated can be really helpful in finding ways to communicate about it in the moment or before or after. And actually, I think I include in this chapter, I'm not entirely sure if it's this one or later on, but something that I learned from you in our work together is, as the survivor is relearning to connect to their body and like, is this a yes for me for pleasure? Is this a no for me for pleasure? That there's a spectrum. And so helping them tune into where they are on that spectrum, like, okay, I'll go forward still. I want to still try if I'm at a 5, like a maybe. But if I'm at a 2, I'm going to go ahead and shut that down because I don't want to push too fast, or I might dissociate. And relearning that for themselves, but also communicating that with their partner, and their partner knowing that's a really normal thing has been really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I have found that to be very useful, is using spectrums, which really comes from solution focused therapy types approaches, which is a lot of scaling, right?
Yeah.
A lot of scaling questions, right? On a scale from 1 to 10,
Yeah.
instead of the binary, yes or
Right.
no, right?
Yeah.
Which we can feel kind of caught or trapped, or that we have to be rigid. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I might want to, I may not want to, I might be interested. There are times I'm interested, there are times I'm not.
Yeah.
Maybe depending on the arousal level I'm at,
Yeah.
all those things. So yeah, that's great. Okay, so your next chapter is called Your Relationship as a Source for Healing. And I think that you talk quite a bit about, we heal in spaces of safety. And this is where I think you get a lot into attachment theory, which I think has some really nice language around things. I also really appreciate that you seem to say, we can move from different attachment styles,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot of people come into my office and I feel have taken attachment styles like a DSM diagnosis, like
Yeah.
this is what I am always. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I don't know that it's that,
Yeah.
rigid. I think we can show up in different attachment styles depending on what's happening,
Right.
or in which relationship we're in,
Right.
even. So yeah, well, how do you find attachment theory helpful? And you had some, again, great questions for people to ask themselves, especially when they're upset.
Yeah. Yeah. I find attachment theory to be really helpful to folks who, when they are showing up in certain ways, when they're activated or they're triggered, and they're thinking, I don't want this to happen in the relationship anymore. So if the survivor gets triggered and then starts shutting down, and they're wishing, they and their partner wish, I wish we could come together. We can look at the lens of attachment of, okay, the shutdowns is we're withdrawing. Maybe it's kind of avoidant because we're afraid. And how can the partner who's not the survivor recreate a sense of safety, which would look like secure attachment in that moment, so that the survivor can move closer to them or feel safe enough when they're ready to move closer to them. So so we're not always going to, I also think about attachment really fluid. And we're not always gonna, I think sometimes when I'm working with couples and they come in knowing about attachment, there's like, we want a secure attachment, and then it's always gonna look secure, right? We're always gonna do it the way that the wonderful Sue Johnson says secure attachment looks like, and everything's going to be wonderful, and we're not going to have conflict look funky sometimes. But that we have this knowing of when this is happening, it's not, it's about fear, and it's about fear, either the trauma fear or fear of losing each other, losing connection, and we can create that security in the moment for our partner and that helps their healing. I always tell the partners of the survivor that while this might feel overwhelming at times, this work of helping our partners heal, they're actually in the best seat to help their partner heal. Like, it's really a very cool place to be, because so when trauma is relational, we need that relational person, the person who's closest to us, that primary person, to be really safe. And it's such a gift they can give to their partner.
I completely agree with that. In fact, I have told my clients for years, decades now, that if we can invite your partner to some of our sessions, and if we can have your partner be an ally to this healing process, usually the work goes faster, more effective, and it's longer lasting.
Yeah.
So I mean, not, obviously not everybody is partnered, and a lot of people are doing really amazing work on their own. At the same time, if you do have a partner who is willing to come in and meet with your therapist, and if the therapist is willing to really, have some of these what I call guest sessions, right? Like, we're still doing the primary work with the individual, but the partner or spouse is coming in as support, and it's huge. Plus, sometimes you realize the partner needs help too, right? Obviously. Because they've got questions, they're confused, they've got their own feelings. They've oftentimes tried a lot of things that have either not worked or made things worse, and now they feel even more worried about doing anything at all. So yeah, I think that's I don't want people to underestimate that.
Well, when the trauma is relational, what sexual trauma is, we then need corrective relational experiences. Like, if we break our leg and then the leg's healed, but we're not walking, do we trust that it's really healed? Do we, and so we're walking in that relationship. We're doing it again. In a corrective way, in a way that feels a lot safer than the trauma did.
Yeah, for sure. You, I think chapters 4, 5, I don't know, 6 even, you start really get into communication styles, right? And what I really loved about the book, and what I really would encourage everybody to do, is to read so many of these examples, because you're role modeling how to have these conversations. I'm just going to read one. And one of the things that you talk about is mirroring. I call it validating. I think it's all the same thing, right? It's kind of like, how do you, when you're talking about something sensitive and hard, a lot of times we get into these defensive postures between two people. How can one person take more of an active listening role, mirror what the other person is saying? So here's partner A saying, "What's wrong? I was just trying to give you a hug goodbye and you went stiff. Are you mad at me?" And partner B's like, "Mad at you? No, I had those nightmares again last night, and I just don't like being touched when I feel this way. I don't know, it's a lot." And then partners A is like staying with their own hurt instead of starting to tune into what the partner just said was something very vulnerable. So partner A is, well, that hurts my feelings. I was just trying to hug you. I'm not the one who hurt you, but you keep treating me like I am. So that was a missed opportunity to create that safety for your partner, who just basically gave you an answer as to why they went stiff, but you were not in a space where you could really hear them because you're stuck in your own hurt. So, so here's an example, the same conversation after partner A has learned some of these skills that you're walking them through. So partner A is like, what's wrong? I was just trying to give you a hug goodbye and you went stiff. Are you mad at me? And the partner B says, mad at you? No, I had those nightmares again last night and I just don't like being touched when I feel this way. I don't know, it's a lot. And partner A notices their feelings are hurt by what partner is saying, but takes a deep breath, puts their reactions in the pause box for now, and says, oh, wow, that does sound like a lot. Do you want to talk about it? Brilliant. Ta-da. See, it's not that hard.
Right.
It is hard, but it's not that hard.
It's simple. It's simple, but it's so hard to do in the moment sometimes.
So hard to like control yourself in the moment.
Yeah.
And then partner B, so now partner B is, there's an opening to open up, and partner B says, yeah, I guess I do. I mean, I feel bad that you felt me go stiff. I don't want to hurt you, but I'm sensitive in the mornings after these nightmares because the images of what happened to me keep playing in my mind. And like, I know you're a safe person, but my body doesn't trust it because my mind is stuck replaying those terrible things. Now there was a lot more information that was able to come forth.
Right. Yeah.
Even some acknowledgments and some, some assurances, like, I know it's not you, but.
Right. Yeah. Partner B does give partner A some like, I feel bad about it. I care, which is often going on.
Yep.
Like, I don't want to hurt you. You are my safe person. Yeah.
Yep. And then you go forward a few pages later, continuing this conversation. So now partner A, here's two options. So partner A can be like, wow, well, thanks for sharing, which isn't a horrible response, but it kind of shuts it down. It doesn't keep it going. It's like, oh, wow, thanks for sharing. So here's another option. So that, that person just said, I know you're a safe person, but my body doesn't trust it, blah, blah, blah. So now partner A is going to practice these mirroring skills, which is just kind of repeating back. This is magic, people. I'm just telling you it's magic. So this person says, oh, wow, you're still feeling like you're in that nightmare right now. It was like, it wasn't me reaching to hug you, but someone else who's scary. So see, they're just repeating, like, so this is what you're telling me, basically. And now partner B, who you say feels understood, so they can even open up even more, says, yes, exactly. Part of me is still back there in that nightmare. I just froze when you touched me because it was startling, like someone grabbed me, and I just freeze and my heart pounds. And so partner A mirrors again. You can do this quite a few times. So, and partner A says, so even though you're here with me, it's like your body and your mind are still back there at the assault. And when I touched you, it startled you. That sounds really scary. And then partner B, feeling close to partner A, says even more, yes, it's so scary. And then I feel bad because I do really like hugs from you. I don't want you to stop hugging me, but I also really don't want to be so scared. I witness this all the time in my sessions, when I can get people to slow down, when I can get people to breathe, when I can get people to mirror what the other person's saying. Now we're sitting with so much more information and so much more empathy, so much more people feeling understood, assurances between the couple, and that intimacy and that safety that you're talking about just increase exponentially. Yes.
Yeah. And as you were reading it back to me, I was taken to my relationship with my husband, because when he learned to do this, we had these moments. And as you were reading through it, I know I wrote it, so don't want to toot my own horn too much, but as you're reading through it, like, I started getting a little teary because I was thinking about how I naturally want to lean into him when he hears me. Like, when he's able to, in the beginning of our relationship, when these moments would happen, I would often be like, you're making this about you. You're making this about you. Like, this isn't about you. And it would just escalate in this conflict that tore us apart more. And when he was able to just stay with me and mirror and validate and have that empathy, to feel seen and to feel just like, oh my gosh, I just want to get in for that hug now, because you're holding me emotionally, and it's okay. You're showing me it's okay that I have these reactions.
Yeah, right. Exactly. This is really differentiation work, right?
Yeah,
This is about being able to tolerate another person's story, another
yeah,
person's reactions that, like you're saying, don't really have to do with them. Doesn't mean it doesn't affect them.
yeah,
It
yeah,
does. Obviously, that's why they're having their own reaction.
right.
But usually the person who's in that ally position is going to be slightly, in a slightly kind of one up position as far as being able to offer that tolerance. And once that tolerance is offered, and the other person is like, oh, this person can tolerate me showing up in my kind of
Yeah.
triggered ways, they can handle it, they can handle it, then usually that person can become a safer person as well
Mhm.
for the
Mhm.
partner.
Yes.
Now, obviously, in an ideal space, well, in an ideal space, nobody would have sexual trauma, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times, it's not that one person has it and one person doesn't.
Mhm.
Sometimes you have two people partnered who
Mhm.
have had some level of sexual trauma, especially like I said before, when we're including emotional sexual trauma and religious and cultural
Right.
sexual traumas, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's an extra kind of,
Right.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, hurdle.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. And it's um what I'll say to my couples a lot when we're practicing these skills is we're practicing imperfectly. So when we can be the one to show up and do the mirroring and create that space, do it. When we can't, that's okay. We're imperfect, and then we try repair. So we're if we're both willing to offer, like in my relationship with my husband, he has his own traumas, he has his own relational triggers, and when we've each imperfectly taken these risks of I'm going to show up, I'm going to be um the one that puts my stuff in the pause box right now and just shows up with you. um then more trust, more security is created, and then it's easier for them to show up for me differently, and then it's easier for me to do it again, and so we're just building on it. But yeah, that's actually, I'm thinking I don't know that any of the couples in the book I talked explicitly about how we often both will have that, have some kind of a sexual trauma response or relationship trauma response come up, but that is common.
Yeah, right.
Mhm.
Right, like I've had many couples where it's like, and by the way, toot your own horn away, but as where maybe if one person is withdrawing due to a sexual trauma trigger, but then the other person is triggered because maybe they had parents who emotionally withdrew.
Right.
And so
Abandonment.
totally
Yeah.
different, totally different kind of trauma,
Yeah.
but it's what's coming up for them, right?
Right.
It's that deep sense of rejection when the other person is just trying to protect themselves. It's not about rejection,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's so complicated and yet
Mhm.
makes so much sense how
Mhm.
this can show up in so many
Mhm.
folks. All right. Well, one of the last chapters you have is establishing or regaining intimate connection and pleasure, which is really a lot of really great tips and questions, again, for people as they actually sexually connect with one another. And I'm just going to share, again, a few of the questions that you asked just from having a conversation about safety. I think these are just, again, simple yet brilliant questions. So, for example, if you're a partner, you can say, what helps you feel safe with me? These are open ended questions. These are not usually yes, no questions. Is there anything I'm already doing before, during, or after physical intimacy that helps you feel safe? Right. So I love that too, because we're not just talking about the act of intercourse or whatever course you're having, outer course. We're talking about before we even get to sex, what helps, may the build up to sex. Some people do call that foreplay. I try to call it outer course now because I think it's
Mhm.
all these things
Yeah.
that help
I love
people
that.
get
Mhm.
to orgasm and get to certain types of pleasure they want to experience. And then after, because the afterglow period we know is like a beautiful time to
Yeah.
really help you do a lot of this connection, do all the hormonal releases of all the lovely feelings that we're having,
Uh-huh.
especially if you both have reached orgasm or one of you has reached orgasm in a way that was mutually pleasurable for both of you. So that's a lovely question. Is there anything I'm doing in those moments that causes you to feel less safe? Right. And to really be able to hear that and not let our sexual egos get in the way, like, oh no, I'm not doing it right. Or, just basic things like, can you take your hand and guide my hand as far as pressure or where you want to be touched, or move my hand if I'm not touching in a place where you want to be touched. But for so many people, just those small things can be like, oh, you must
Right.
not like how I'm doing it, or I'm not a
Right.
good lover, or
Yeah.
all those kinds of kind of silly things get in the way of
Right.
actually really good feedback.
Right. Right. Right.
Go ahead. I
Oh,
don't
I
know.
was just gonna say, yeah, I want, and I think all of us sex therapists want to normalize giving feedback and receiving feedback, and letting sex be not the pressure of performance or about our ego or what we've been told or come to believe it should be, but just about this creative, intimate joining that we can have. And so these conversations, I've been amazed with couples that I've worked with that will start sex therapy, and after getting to know them and understanding what's been going on, I'll just give some homework and doing questions like this with each other, and they'll come back and they're just like, we've never talked about this, and it's amazing to talk about this. Like it's such a quick shift in the dynamic to open up about these things with each other and to know each other in this different way.
Yeah. And it goes back to that spectrum thing we were talking about earlier, because maybe I do like a certain pressure of touch, but
Mm-hmm.
only at a certain arousal level.
Yeah.
So that
Right.
can be confusing, because it's like, well, you
Right.
liked it last time. Why don't you
Yeah.
like it this time?
Right. Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
I wasn't as aroused. Maybe I had a more
Yeah.
stressful day. Maybe the
Yeah.
triggers are more, or, maybe I had that nightmare,
Yeah.
that has me a little bit more tender than normal, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we're not the same person every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and in our patriarchal oppressive society, there's like right and wrong. We're told there's right and wrong. So then it's like, well, I want to learn the right way to be your lover. Well, it depends.
Yeah.
And it's going to change over time.
Right. And things that, yeah, I'll, I think too, I've had this experience working with ethical non-monogamous folks. This is kind of goes along with this too,
Mm-hmm.
is that, well, like let's say a heterosexual couple, and maybe the husband tells me, well, but she enjoyed this particular sex act in this situation with this other person, but then
Mm-hmm.
doesn't enjoy it at home with me alone.
Uh-huh.
And being very hurt by that, right?
Yeah.
Because
Right.
and she told me that this is something that she doesn't like to do because of her
Right.
sexual trauma, but now I realize it's just that she doesn't like to do it with me. And I'm like, oh no, no, no. This
Yeah.
is
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
not
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not a good framing, right? Like
Right.
ethical monogamy is a very different space.
Right.
Lots of things can be shifting and feeling
Right.
differently in that
Yeah.
kind of a space than when the two of you are in an intimate space together at home.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to agree. Yeah, it's a totally different. There's so many factors into each sexual moment. And so for someone to feel really free to express this here and not here, there's something really beautiful and special about the relationship here. Like it's different, not better or worse.
Right. And then can we actually celebrate that? Like, oh,
Yeah.
wow, this particular setting, this worked for you.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. And I was there to witness it, or
Yeah.
you told me about it, right? Or
Yeah.
like, this was an amazing thing, but now we don't have to duplicate it or try to have that
Yeah.
pressure. Because then, of course, as soon as you add pressure,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right. Okay. Well, you have so many more questions. I mean, like just turn ons and turn offs, like asking people about their environment. Do you like the lights on? Do you like the lights dimmed? What kinds of sheets do you like on the bed? All that kind of stuff. Even like certain, I mean, I know one of the things that we do is body mapping, where you might like, I don't know, take a sheet of paper and just say, okay, these are the places where I just kind of don't want to be touched, or I don't want to be touched until I reach a certain level, which I'll clue you into that, or
Mhm.
and having little code words, or even or
Mhm.
just direct things like, now you
Mhm.
touch my nipples, right? Or maybe
Mhm.
we have something, that we call the nipples that is just kind of fun between us. So then
Yeah.
no. So like what parts of your body feel sexual? Where do you want to be touched? Where you do not want to be touched?
Mhm.
What
Mhm.
kinds of sexual positions? What kinds of sometimes people were traumatized through different types of sex, whether it was anal sex or oral sex, or
Mm.
and so they may want to stay away from those, or at times stay away from them, right?
Right.
Or may want to ease back into some of those things without a lot
Mhm.
of pressure. So, I mean, you just kind of go through everything, like hair, neck, shoulders, hands, chest. I mean, like, again, people are not having usually these
Right.
detailed of conversations.
Right. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I just love all the questions. So I know we're kind of coming to, and it's not just body, tastes, scents, sometimes
Mhm.
having certain lotions or taking a shower or bath, or sometimes not doing those things. I mean, it just all depends, right? On
Right.
what people, sex toys even,
Yeah.
what kinds of sex toys might be helpful and what kinds of sex toys might be triggering.
Mhm.
Um, and when and
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
and at what times.
Right. Right.
All right. So I guess I just want to kind of, have you share final thoughts. Like what am I not asking you? What are you super
Mhm.
excited for people to know that, as far as what's the hope? You end with kind of a chapter of hope and healing. So
Mhm.
what do you want people to know about this?
I think that what I most want people to know is that it's such a brave journey that they're on when they're whether they're the partner of the survivor themselves, and there's so much like there's an intensity in the moments of trigger where we might feel a lot of pressure and we're trying to show up and we're trying to do it right and we want to help our loved one, we want to be close. And then there's also a lightness to the playfulness that can come when there's safety and when we heal together. And so I was excited to do the chapter on sex because I think sex is our playful outlet, and so bonding, and it can be really fun. And so having these conversations, even the mirroring, I think, can be fun sometimes because we're being seen and we get to open up more and more. And so let there be a lightness even in the intensity and the pain of the healing. And it doesn't need to be light all the time, but it can be. And then also the final chapter, I include some pieces that survivors or partners of survivors have written. So there's a lot of hope instilled in those, and it was really meaningful to me to be able to include those. And I just hope that if you're not a survivor and you're listening to this, you're inspired to be an ally and learn ways to support your loved ones if this stuff comes up.
I love it. And I love that. I love that healing doesn't have to be heavy. I know oftentimes when I'm just starting with somebody who's coming in and maybe it's the first time they're talking about this, I'm the first therapist.
Mm.
I can just almost feel it in the room, right?
Yeah.
The hesitation, the worry, the what am I getting myself into? Am I opening up a Pandora's box? I'm not going to be able to be
Mhm.
closed again. It can be really scary to take those steps towards healing. And so I think just having a sense that, yeah, there are parts, of course, of healing that are heavy, but not all of it has to be heavy. And we can reclaim a lightness to sexuality. We can reclaim pleasure in sexuality. We can reclaim, just um yeah, just fun, creativity, playfulness, laughter, silliness.
Yeah.
All of those things can be part of passion and ongoing sexual stuff. So, and I know that I've definitely experienced it. I always try to normalize it. There's still times I have triggers. I don't think healing
Mhm.
means I'll never have a trigger
Right.
again,
Mhm.
but I'm much more prepared to deal with those triggers when they come up. I'm much more prepared to talk to my partner and to let them know that a trigger is coming up for me. I've
Mhm.
got pause techniques, I've got re-engagement techniques, a lot of the things that you cover in here. And I have a lot of fun with my
Yeah.
sex life, right? And
Yeah.
and it's a very important part of who I am as a person and a part of my relationship. So um, I think that trauma is horrible. I wish we didn't have to go through it. At the same time, it doesn't have to rob us from everything
Right.
that's good.
Mhm.
So I love that message. Where can people find you? How do people, like, if they want to reach out, if you want to get in touch with you? And I'm gonna just say, here's the book again, right? Loving
There's the
Trauma,
book sold everywhere
Sexual
books are
Trauma.
sold. And then so our practice website is lovehealgrow.com. And so if you're looking for a therapist in California on these concerns, you can reach out to us there. And you can follow me on Instagram, Megan ms.lovehealgrow is my Instagram handle.
Okay. And I'll make sure and kind of tag all of that. Plus, Dr. Stephanie Bueller did your forward, and we both love her. She's amazing.
Yes.
So she gives the thumbs up of approval. But really, I do think this is kind of groundbreaking, and I encourage everybody to go get this book. And I really think, quite frankly, even if you don't have sexual trauma, the chapters on how to talk to each other,
yeah, they would help.
how to mirror, you did such a good just job of talking about repair and rupture work and how to have some of these conversations that even if the conversations are not about sexual trauma, I think you did a really great job. So
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time spent with us today, Megan, and have a great rest of your week.
You too, Natasha. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional Facebook page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The intro and outro music for these episodes are by Otter Creek.
There is a place where time slows to nature's pace, and there is space there to find yourself in her embrace. Some places should be left alone. Now so we can always go to the homeland of the heart. 10,000 years of our human history etched on her canyon halls, alongside Earth's mysteries. Some places should be left alone. Nordisch geschehen so we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart. Deep in our cities, we sleep without her stars, yet still her presence sustains us from afar. Some places should be left alone. Nordisch geschehen so we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart.